Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Poisson. We are well into week 2 of the war in the Middle East, and the world is facing one of the most severe shocks to energy markets since the 1970s. Oil prices have now surged to over $100 a barrel, the highest they have been in years, driving up fuel prices for consumers around the world. The Strait of Hormuz, the artery of 20% of the world's oil and gas, is effectively shut down. Iran has threatened to set on fire any ship that dares to cross. Qatar has shut down production of liquefied natural gas after Iran struck 2 of its sites. The country makes up 1/5 of the world's LNG exports. In the aftermath, we've seen natural gas prices spike in both Asia and Europe. The fear of an energy crisis that threatens the global economy is no longer theoretical. To talk through the very high stakes here, I am joined by Jim Crane. He is a fellow in Middle East Energy Studies at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy in Texas. Jim was also a longtime Associated Press reporter based in the Middle East. Jim, hi. Thanks so much for coming onto the show. It's really great to have you.
Thanks, Jamie. It's great to be here.
Let's start with the Strait of Hormuz. These oil producers are not sending their tankers through this narrow maritime choke point off Iran's southern coast. And as a result, oil-producing countries in the region are slowing or stopping production.
This is the fear. An oil tanker apparently hit by a drone off the coast of Oman. It's unclear who launched it. But Iran is warning vessels do not pass.
Attention all ships from now on. All navigating through the Strait of Hormuz is forbidden.
How significant is this strait?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's huge, right? So the Strait of Hormuz is just one of those critical nodes in the global economy that, really the economy cannot function without. World consumes about just over 100 million barrels a day, and about 20 pass through the strait. And natural gas, right? LNG, also about 20% of liquefied natural gas cargoes pass through the strait. And as we're finding out now, lots of other really important stuff passes through the strait, both directions, right? So aluminum, fertilizer, sulfur, glass. It is super important. As far as the precedent for this, we don't really have one. So this has never happened before. The situation we're in now is the rationale for all these strategic petroleum reserves around the world. So the one we have here in the U.S., there's various others, China, all the OECD countries have them.
Yeah.
And that's why we have them, is for something just like this. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, I want to get to those reserves with you in a couple of minutes. But first, on Sunday, according to Fox News, Trump said, quote, "These ships should go through the Strait of Hormuz and show some guts. There's nothing to be afraid of. We sunk all of their ships." He's referring to the Iranian Navy. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody's taking orders from Trump. I'm sure they'd like to. They'd love to get through the strait, if they're tankers with full cargoes waiting to get out or empty tankers trying to get in. But they're unwilling to do it because it's super easy to hit one of those tanker ships. I mean, we saw it in the tanker war in the 80s. You had, more than 200 oil tankers hit, and about, I think, 55 of them actually sunk, went to the bottom. And then we just saw, just over a year, the Houthi, much less capable quasi-state actor, I guess you could call them. They were able to completely shut another global choke point, the Bab el-Mandeb, and prevent transit of the Red Sea, even with the U.S. Navy there, right? The Houthi don't have a Navy either. So you don't need a Navy to block the Strait of Hormuz.
And could these tankers take an alternate route here?
No, there's just one entry and one exit from the Persian Gulf. So you did have an alternate in the Red Sea, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't get out the Bab el-Mandeb, if the Houthis are blocking it, you can go out the Suez Canal at the top, right? But we're not in that situation here.
If this goes on for several more weeks or months, I just wonder if you could play it out for me. Who will be the hardest hit here? What are some of the ramifications?
We are looking at, I don't know how long it could be closed. It could stay closed the entire war. I mean, I know
Mhm.
Trump's got an idea for a couple ideas for reopening it, whether or not those work. Or so if we assume it's going to stay closed, things get increasingly dire, right? We're seeing price jumps. So the oil price has been jumping, not as much as I would have expected, but it was close to $120 for a little while today.
Mhm.
Natural gas prices are way up, so that's being affected. LNG prices in Europe and in Asia, which Asia's where most of the oil and the gas is going. So that's where probably where a lot of the pain will start for oil and gas is, the importing countries, if they actually cannot get their hands on supply, that would affect them. But the exporting countries are the ones who are really under the spotlight right now. They're having to shut in their fields. So Iraq started. Now
Mhm.
Kuwait is shutting in production. I've heard Saudi Arabia is either thinking about it or has already started. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of pain for exporting countries in that region, and then eventually for importing countries. I mean, oil importing countries, the more developed ones have a buffer. The ones that don't have oil and storage are probably the ones that are going to see more pain in the short run.
Like who?
So Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. I've heard Taiwan was in a tough spot here.
Mhm. Mhm. I read that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, either if how much storage they have or whether it's something that's
Mhm.
if it's another problem.
You mentioned that Trump has maybe some ideas to try and open it back up, I guess. But if all you need is like a missile to take out one of these ships, like how could they even force its reopening?
Yeah, so we did in the '80s, the US Navy, reflagged oil tankers with US flags and then escorted them out in convoys with the US ships, and it worked. So that was a war between Iran and Iraq, and they were targeting all sorts of oil infrastructure and shipping. But the U.S. was, in that war, not a combatant. I think that's key. Here, we started this war. Our navy is, the legitimate military targets for the Iranians. So it's would seem to me to be very easy to cause lots of trouble with even simple weapons, like even a single person with a shoulder fired missile or some type of anti ship missile from the Iranian side. The strait is only 20 miles across. You can see Iran very easily. I mean, I used to spend time on the Omani side of the Strait of Hormuz on the Musandam Peninsula. You can see the Iranian side. You can see the tankers going past right in front of you. That's still to come, potentially.
On Sunday, Israel targeted Iran's oil facilities for the first time, depots and a refinery. We talked about this on the show yesterday, and our guest who covers the Middle East for The Economist made the point that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's payroll is dependent on the oil industry. And do you think that we could see um, Israel and the US try to seize oil within Iran in the coming days? And how could they do that?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this too. I mean, I think they could. So far, the big Karg Island terminal, the main Iranian export terminal on a small island in the Gulf, that's been off limits, right? I think the U.S. has made it really clear to the Israelis, as they did last June in the 12-day war, not to hit the Karg Island terminal. I mean, Iran has made clear for decades that that's really an inflection point for them. It would trigger a major escalation beyond what we're seeing now. But if things get bad enough, the Karg Island is gonna be a target. The Saudis have already warned if oil their ability to export oil is impaired, they'll go after Karg Island.
Mm.
Could U.S. commandos or Israeli commandos seize it? Sort of the Venezuela playbook. I mean, possibly. I mean, there's no compliant actor inside Iran yet, that could work with the U.S. as we have in Venezuela.
I've seen some analysts say that if there is a ground invasion, that the island would be one of the most strategic targets, right? Where 90% of Iran's oil export comes from. Just Iran's crude oil reserves make up about 12% of the world's total, and so just from the U.S.'s perspective, what could seizing that, along with their own shale and what they're doing in Venezuela, what does it mean kind of for the U.S. strategic interest, right? Because you hear people talk about how maybe oil is part of their end game here. I'm just trying to understand that.
Well, I mean, I think right now the U.S. would like Iran to keep exporting because that oil is needed in the global economy. I mean, ironically, it seems like the ships that are able to get through the Strait of Hormuz right now are mostly Iranian carriers or ships that are carrying Iranian crude. And it's helping keep prices a little bit less than they might otherwise be if Kharg Island were seized. So I think, even though the Iranians are getting that revenue for the strategic calculations of the U.S., I think they'd like to keep it going, just to keep that extra oil. For the same reason that's why we're temporarily giving sanctions waivers on Russian crude.
Right. Do you think that greater control over Iran's oil industry is part of their plan here?
I think it would be really hard for the U.S. to control Iran's oil industry. It's a big country. There's 92 million people there. It is not in the same sad shape that Venezuela was in. There's so much opposition. It would take so many, boots on the ground to capture Iranian oil infrastructure and keep that flowing. If there was a government in Tehran that was bent on that not happening. So I don't think the U.S. could really commandeer Iran's oil industry. I mean, I think Iran has strategic value because it has an oil industry, and oil exporting countries tend to attract more military intervention because of their strategic importance. But I think it would be really, really hard. We couldn't even do it in Syria. So I think Iran would be just a bridge too far.
You've already brought up some kind of historical examples here, but there were a couple of big oil shocks in the 1970s I want to parse with you. There was one in 1973 when some Arab states cut off oil production and limited exports in protest of the U.S.'s support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War.
To increase the supply of heating oil that will be available this winter, we must adjust production schedules and divert petroleum, which might normally go for the production of gasoline, to the production of more heating oil. I am asking tonight that all gasoline filling stations close down their pumps between 9 p.m. Saturday night and midnight Sunday every weekend, beginning December 1.
Prices quadrupled within 3 months. And then in 1979, following the revolution in Iran, can you remind us what happened then?
Yeah, I mean, so prices went from 3 to 12 in the U.S. dollars in 73, and then in 78, 79, the Iranian Revolution, and then the Iran-Iraq War pushed them up into the $40 range, above $40 in the early 80s. Iran completely halted oil exports in 1978. So, that was sort of the start of that second oil crisis in the 70s.
The energy crisis has not yet overwhelmed us, but it will if we do not act quickly. It's a problem that we will not be able to solve in the next few years, and it's likely to get progressively worse through the rest of this century. We must not be selfish or timid if we hope to have a decent world for our children and our grandchildren. We simply must balance our demand for energy with our rapidly shrinking resources.
You had all this panic buying that was going on.
I'm in here for now already. There's no shortage. I don't believe there's a shortage.
This is the second gas line this morning.
What happened at the first one?
They ran out.
I've been in 2 gas lines already.
This morning?
This morning.
How long did you wait for the first one?
I've been in both lines over an hour, and I'm out of gas. Dead out.
There was, Iraq and Iran fought a really long war with more than 1 million people killed. Iraqi exports were also, compromised. And then you had that tanker war that kicked off with all those ships hit.
What's happening is that the war on land between Iran and Iraq is spilling over into the sea, with Western tankers being the sitting targets for both sides.
It's a voyage through the area where 14 oil tankers have now been hit by air attack from Iran or Iraq.
Missiles against tankers are the weapons that both sides are using to try and break the stalemate in their war on land. Iraq began with exocets. Iran has hit back at ships like this one, the chemical venture.
Really a terrible time in oil markets, but big differences with what we have today, right? So, at that time, the global economy was way more oil intensive, right? We used a lot more oil per dollar of GDP then than we do now. We've made enormous efficiency improvements in use of oil, right? Especially in the transport sector. Back in the 70s, cars were just not very efficient, right? And now they're more efficient than they were back then. And now you can completely insulate yourself from geopolitical risk in the oil market if you buy an electric vehicle, right? So there's like substitutes now for oil that didn't exist back then. But, this is a bigger outage than we had in the 70s, right? This is, between 10 and 20 million barrels a day. Yes, markets have some slack in them still. They're still oversupplied, which, in the 70s, they were really tight. But we have the U.S. not as a more of a neutral observer this time. We're a combatant. It's the U.S. that actually caused this problem. So we are a combatant. We're a target in this situation. And we're supposed to be the player that guarantees the security of our allies in the Gulf. And our Gulf allies are finding out that, our security provider is not only causing the insecurity, but its security forces and embassies are actually the target set, for Iran, to hit inside our country. So, it's a it's a much messier situation that this time around than you had last time.
And also these countries' own infrastructure and energy infrastructure too, right? I think Saudi Arabia was saying that they shot down a drone that was aimed at one of their oil fields, I think. I want to come back to this idea of reserves. The Trump administration is saying that they have more leeway to act because there's ample supply. How much of a buffer is there here?
There's weeks and weeks of buffer, or oil and storage in some places. So Japan has got between 100 and 200 days worth of total imports in storage inside Japan. So China has got 1.2 billion barrels of oil in storage, from what I hear. So that's about what the entire OECD has in storage. So they've got it, basically the same amount as the entire developed world in storage in China. The U.S. has the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but unfortunately, we did not refill it after the Biden administration it drained it during high oil prices at election time, 2022.
The Department of Energy will release another 15 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, extending our previously announced release through the month of December. I've told my team behind me here to be prepared to look for further releases in the months ahead if needed.
So we're not in quite as secure a situation, I guess, with our reserves, but the U.S. is also a net oil exporter. So we might take a hit on prices here in the U.S. and Canada. But I don't think the supply is at risk in the U.S. or in Canada like it is in these net oil importing countries.
I wonder if you could explain to me a little bit more why countries like Canada and the U.S. would take a hit on prices when supply isn't really an issue.
Well, we're relatively minor exporters compared to the Saudis and the big producers in the Persian Gulf. I mean,
Hmm.
that's where oil prices are formed in the Gulf. I mean, Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil exporter. And so when it changes production, it usually does this through OPEC and makes big announcements. That moves the price. So their inability to get oil to market is moving the price as well. Um, if you imagine the global oil market like a bathtub with lots of spigots pouring oil into it, lots of different players increasing and sometimes decreasing. Right now, there's a couple of spigots have either turned all the way off or starting to, and we're still taking just as much oil out of the drain, so that causes the price to go up.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens through OPEC, and they sort of calibrate it carefully. And this time it's not. It's happening in a much more chaotic way, and nobody really knows how we're going to be affected by all that.
I take your point there, but I wonder if we could spend a little bit of time sort of trying to make this a little bit more concrete for people in how this could affect their everyday lives, right? And I know you talk about how everything we buy and consume has an energy signature. And I wonder if you could just elaborate for me a little bit more on what you mean by that and how this could affect sort of how people go about their days and their lives in the coming days and weeks and beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, our research shows that every $10 increase in the price of a barrel of oil pushes up gasoline prices here in the US by about 25 cents. Since we use oil as our main transportation fuel, it's about 90-ish% of global transportation services are provided by oil-based fuels. Because of that, it's not easy to substitute for oil, and transportation is one of those things that people are just willing to pay for no matter how much it costs, right? There's not a lot of price elasticity in transportation. If you've got a 20-mile commute to work every day, and the price of your fuel doubles, you still need to get to work. You don't have a lot of options, so it's going to trickle into the economy as inflation. It's going to triggering inflation in transportation costs for individuals, but also for moving goods around the world. This crisis isn't just hampering oil supply; it's also keeping fertilizer, off the market. So the Gulf countries are also really, really big fertilizer exporters. Without enough fertilizer, food yields, crop yields will go down, and food will get a lot more expensive.
Yeah, and all
Without
of a sudden, like a loaf of bread costs more because the fertilizer used to grow it is stuck in like a Qatari port.
Yeah, and then, your wheat field isn't gonna produce as much wheat. And it's also having ripple effects in metals, right? So it turns out sulfur is used in refining nickel and copper and other metals, right? You need to make sulfuric acid to do that, and 50% of the global sulfur supply comes out of the Gulf. And so, countries are scrambling to find new sources of sulfur. Also, there's a big aluminum smelting industry inside the Gulf, so they can't get their bauxite in to smelt it, and they can't get the finished aluminum out. So there's a force majeure there too. Um,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
alternate fuels. So for LNG, we talked a little bit about liquefied natural gas being, the 20% of that global supply is bottled up inside the Gulf right now. That's causing a price spike in coal, right? So
Yep.
coal is a substitute in the power market for gas. So
Yeah, and dirtier. Yeah.
way dirtier. Yes. Yes. So there's a lot of really bad things.
Yeah, this I was just gonna say this is really bad, Jim. I'm glad you kind of wrapped it up there. Qatar's energy minister has warned that an energy crisis triggered by the Iran conflict could, quote, bring down the economies of the world. And as we've talked about, this is obviously very bad for those countries that depend so much on exporting oil. I just wonder if you think that statement is hyperbolic or if you think that he has a point. And if he does, what would the warning signs for that look like?
Well, he's definitely got a point for the Qatari economy, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
the basically exporting liquefied natural gas is the basis of the Qatari state, right? I mean, that's the richest in the world on a per capita income basis, and its economy and even its political system are based on getting natural gas out of the Strait of Hormuz into markets. So for other countries, I mean, it might be a bit hyperbolic for now. I mean, if you're not in as tight a spot, if you're a country that doesn't import so much from the Gulf, you'll have to deal with higher prices on a lot of goods. There'll be a lot of inflation, maybe stagflation we're starting to hear about. So economic growth, starts to stagnate or fall as prices go up, which is really painful. So, yeah, I mean, I think the world will be in for a real tough patch. Is it an existential crisis for everybody? No, it's not.
Okay. That feels like a good place for us to end. Jim, thank you so much for this. Really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, Jamie. Anytime.
All right. That's all for today. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.